welcome back to the channel. I'm Laura. If this is your first time, be sure to subscribe, like the video, that encourages me, and share. That is how you say thank you. I have been having fun showing you some very affordable vacations along the North Carolina coast, and today is no exception. Fort Macon State Park is completely free. You heard that right. This is a free vacation day. Of course, you'd want to pack a picnic lunch or grab something along the way. Fort Macon State Park is located in Carteret County, and it's only 6 miles from Atlanta Beach. So if you take a look at the accommodations that I told you about, I'll link that above. This is an extremely low-cost vacation, and it's a lot of fun. It's impeccably restored. It's a pre-Civil War fort, and it offers daily guided tours and frequent cannon and musket demonstrations. There are all kinds of exhibits inside and outside the fort, and there is an amazing museum on the property with so many interactive activities. I just can't believe this thing is free. They do have a beach that's perfect for swimming. You can go shelling there, and you probably will see a dolphin or two. There's all kinds of trails traversing salt marsh and dune fields, and you can see over 300 species of bird while you're there. Now, I am not going to profess to be any kind of history buff in this. My husband wasn't with us, and he would be the one to know the history. Instead, I'll be sharing with you just the wonder, magnificence, and beauty of this amazing structure that has survived so many years. There's so many neat details I want to show you. I'm not sure why there's a glove on the ground. This dark abyss kind of calls you in. There's no electricity inside this part of the fort. There is an area with some displays and mannequins that I'll show you in a little bit that are air conditioned, but for the most part there are no lights or anything of the sort. You're just kind of free to meander and look around. I love looking at some of the old artifacts, like these original hinges for massive doors and all of the steep staircases that the soldiers must have used on a daily basis. Here in the first level of the fort, you can still see some of the remnants of the tracks that the cannons were sat on. And looking out the windows, I can't help but think about how dark and dreary it must have been in there to stay day after day as a soldier. Interesting. There were no park rangers or anyone around at the time for me to ask questions. This is the off season. I would imagine during summer there would be more people around, but I have so many questions about so many features. But I will tell you the parts that I was able to glean from some of the signs. We believe this was part of the original incarceration department, the jail that they had there for a few years. Wasn't very long. After the Union Army took over the fort, they did use it as a jail, this section, for some of their own betrayers and as well as some of the Confederate military as well. It was also used while this area was under martial law after the Civil War for a couple of years until they could build an established jail. This is one of my favorite parts of the fort. Of course, there's our beautiful flag standing tall above the fort. So cool to think that now we're unified as a country. And now going in here, this is what I was talking about. I am a little bit of a fangirl for old doorways and doors and hardware. And if I could, I would bring these home with me. They are massive, massive doors, every bit of 15 feet tall or longer. And as you look closer, you can see the original hardware, how everything was latched closed, and just the wear and tear and so many years of history that were recorded by these walls and these doors. It's a double door structure, so you have two pairs of doors, and looking even closer, I was thrilled to see the original hammer marks, or it could be where things were tightened up over time, but you can see the hammer marks on the hinges and the hardware of the door. That just fascinates me. Beautifully and well built. You see lots of signs along Fort Macon that remind you that this structure was built for war, not safety. So if you have little ones, you definitely want to keep them nearby. There are a lot of unexpected drop-offs, steep stairs, and just there's all kinds of nooks and crannies to explore, which would be intriguing to a little one. You just want to keep them close by to keep a closer eye on them. I find the walls, the ceilings, and the floors all interesting. It may bore other people, I don't know, but at least you can enjoy the scenery. These floors really intrigued me. It looked like whole logs were cut crossways and then sunk down and sand used as the mortar. Isn't that neat? I just wonder how deep those logs go. And it's really cool to think that those have been there the whole time. And here's an example of me and my lack of historical knowledge. I was thinking, oh, what cute little cannons. And as soon as I was showing my husband the footage, he said, those are mortars. And apparently that's a different type, an older type of cannon used in the 1800s. They have two of those on display in the courtyard. And now we're going inside to some of the air-conditioned displays, or at least humidity conditioned. It seemed like it was cooler in there to me. Interesting look at Civil War era barracks. 2 men to each bunk on each level. There are buttons you can push in each one of these rooms that gives you a little spiel of what it was like to live in the barracks during that time. And here are the commander's quarters, I believe. And you can see this was a sad story. This guy, I don't remember his name, unfortunately. He only lived to be about 35 years old. He spent the majority of his life here, or the later part, and then went home, and he ended up dying from complications from epilepsy. So he truly did give his all and spent his life serving the country. These are really interesting, especially that one all the way to the right. These are different types of cannonballs. That spherical case that's just filled with all kinds of little projectiles. I've never looked inside cannonballs, so I didn't know. I just assumed they were all solid. Maybe I'm naive. Different remnants that were found here on the grounds of the fort. Here's some different types of cannonballs. So many different sizes and materials. And this was the era of smooth-bore ammunition before rifling was invented. You can see some of the rammer rods and all different size shells that were used. This is a huge cannonball. A 15-inch solid shot used by the Navy. This thing weighed 440 pounds. And then we come up to the era of rifled ammunition, which made a huge difference in the way warfare was carried out. Some of those shells. This was also very interesting and exploded cannonball. The fragments were found on the grounds of Fort Macon, and that was shot by the Union Army at Fort Macon on April 25th, which is interesting, 5 days from today, or 4 days by the time I get this out probably. So they found these fragments that had been shot by the Union Army on the grounds. Union Army caused a lot of damage. it's said that if they would have gone on firing for 2 more days, that they would have just decimated the fort. So the Confederate soldiers they ended up having to surrender. Here's a piece of the original Confederate flag that was flown there at Fort Macon. It's made of wool. And here's what I was just talking about. 2 much more days of such firing would have reduced the whole to a mere mass of ruins. So it did end up being surrendered to the Union Army, and then the Union Army ended up pretty much doing the same thing that the Confederate Army had been doing all along there. This is interesting and sad. Both of those men, along with one other, were killed by the same shot. Also interesting to take a look at women's roles at Fort Macon. I always just assumed that during that time the women would have helped to nurse injured soldiers, but it looks like mostly what they did was laundry. They even had men in the roles of cook and nurse. So the women were allowed to come inside the fort. Sometimes when it wasn't full, whole families lived in the fort, and other families lived outside the fort in little log cabins. Here's a ball and chain. A lot of time those were made from cannonballs for prisoners, and this is a handmade crucifixion scene in a U.S. Army hospital bottle. It was carved by prisoner Charles Smith. Very interesting. I'd like to know what materials he used, if that's wooden or if he had some kind of clay. These cannonballs were no joke. About 44 pounds, and the prisoners still had to do hard labor with that attached to their leg to prevent escape. It was a very eerie feeling, although I know this is just a reproduction, but entering this ammunition storage unit, they kept chloride of lime in there to keep an accidental ignition from going off, and they had to take off their shoes and socks to keep any sparks or static charge from igniting anything. That was a dangerous business. This is an interesting display of different uniforms worn by the soldiers as well as prisoners here, all the way from pre-Civil War era to World War II. This little building outside caught my attention. I wanted to know what these X's were all over it. Apparently that's just some kind of support for the structure, but do you have any guesses what this was used for? I thought this was one of the most interesting items on the property. This contraption with a stove underneath is a hot shot furnace, and it was used to heat the cannonballs. They would roll them in from the back, and then the wood stove or the wood fire underneath would heat them up, and they would roll to the front, and there were specialized tools to lift and load the cannons with those. Not a pleasant surprise for invading ships to have a red-hot cannonball launched at their ship. Here is a look at the World War II barracks, what that would have looked like. And we can see here that the stove had a chimney going through the ceiling. I kept wondering what those holes in the ceiling were, if it was for sunlight or ventilation, but I'm guessing that everywhere there's a hole, there was a stove for heating. Again, some of the World War II uniforms. Interesting perspective. All through the fort are these arched doorways, which of course helps handle the heavy load of the brick and mortar. This is one of the last brick and mortar forts in existence, and that was built because once rifling was invented, the artillery could penetrate these walls pretty easily and cause damage. But the arched doorways go all the way through, connecting room to room, and you can see that each room has its own little fireplace to add a bit of warmth. Don't know if those windows originally had glass. I would think not, because I'm sure that they were used for defense as well. Some of them had bars. There's one of those holes in the ceiling. I kept wondering what they were, but pretty sure those were for stovepipes. It's just amazing to think that masons hand-laid this entire monstrosity of a fort. It really is beautiful. And there's such a clash, such a oxymoron, if you will, of beauty at a time of warfare, surrounded by the beautiful ocean. The structure itself really is, I think it's beautiful. But to think that all of this was created for a time of war and defense, it's just mesmerizing. It just blows my mind. Here's some bars that were sawn off. And this little area underneath each of the windows, I couldn't get down there, so I put the camera down there. If you have any idea what that's for, let me know. I'm guessing it was to store ammunition. This was also intriguing, the soldier's daily ration. This is what they got for one entire day, and I don't know if you could see, but there was one little stub, like a 2-inch, if that much, stub of a candle, and that's all they got to burn each day for a light after dark. Interesting look at the mess quarters. Very small. I don't know if there was only one and they took turns or if there were several rooms. Guess not, because it says the kitchen and mess room. Here's some of the china fragments that were found on the site of Fort Macon. And another look at those mortars, one without a cannonball and one has one in there. Fort Macon is interesting, and one thing that makes it unique is it's one of the few forts that were built pretty much underground in a hillside. Here's a look at the storage facility for all of that food, Army surplus flour, salt, and other products that they would be eating on a daily basis. One theory is that the Union Army was trying to hold off, but they had difficulty getting in there, but they were trying to starve the military that was based at the fort out, but they had such a huge store that it would have taken quite a while for that to happen, so they ended up attacking before hunger set in. Another interesting little room, and that's why I'm saying if you have little ones, keep an eye on them. There's so many places for them to run and disappear, and it would be hard to find them quickly. But curiosity did get the best of me, and I did end up going in that little room, and in there is a TV, giving a little bit of a documentary of the history, and just an empty room. Again, that would be interesting to see with a tour guide what they had to say, what was so special about this room. May have been another ammunition storage room or black powder room possibly. And another area of display with a very neat door. That could have been a jail cell, I'm not sure. And here again we have that strange mix of majestic beauty and military might. Guess that's what I took home more than anything from Fort Macon, is just the serenity and war coming together and meeting together. Fort Macon was originally built to defend Morehead City, Beaufort, and the surrounding areas, but it served many uses throughout the years. It's a very interesting place to explore. I highly recommend it. We didn't have time to walk any of the nature trails, but as I understand, there are miles and miles of boardwalks and paths cut through the saltwater marsh. I'm sure there is lots of nature to explore up there. It would be a beautiful way to spend a day if you had more. We stayed here at the fort for just a few hours on our way back home from this wonderful trip. Interesting perspective in the cannon there, something you don't often see. But before we leave, I want to take you by the gift shop because there's some really neat stuff in here. The Civil War chess set is $125. That would be great for a history enthusiast. And just to let you know, I did ask permission to film in the store inside the museum. I explained that this was for a channel who supports elderly and disabled individuals who may not be able to get out there on their own, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to see what is available. And if you're not able to go yourself, you can see a little bit of the fort. These bonnets are only $10. Aren't those precious? So many hand-sewn bonnets. But hopefully, if you aren't able to get out there, you can take a look and enjoy some of the majesty of the fort here in this video. And they have stovepipe hats just like Abraham Lincoln's for only $13. I thought the prices were very reasonable here in this great gift shop. They also have powder horns, which of course originally were made of animal horns. These are replicas made of wood, but they're very good quality, beautiful looking powder horn for $35. A really neat keepsake there at the museum gift shop. And there are samples of Civil War era clothing and household items throughout the store. Nice displays with placards that you can read about the history there at the fort. And they also have lots of cookbooks available, good Southern cooking cookbooks. This is really neat, a historic calligraphy set, and the papers included. Be a great gift for only $20. Wouldn't it be neat to learn calligraphy using a quill pen? Thought that was a lot of fun. They also have a collection of beautiful handmade mugs. These are great quality. That's like a lifelong gift. Has the history of Fort Macon on there for $33. Beautiful mug. This is another style mug that they had there, also for $33, just in a different color. They're both very lovely. Great collectible item and a keepsake to take home to someone you love. These are a lot of fun. They had several of these mini, they're not Lego, they're calling them building blocks, mini sets with different presidents. This is Abraham Lincoln, of course, for $17. Very similar to Legos. There's the finished product. Had several of those in the store. Look, a little Union and Confederate soldier you could build. Civil War soldiers. That one has 477 pieces. It's $17. I thought this was a great idea for gifts or for a hobbyist. I wouldn't mind bringing some of these home to work on if I had the extra time to put into it. They even had some cannons for $17. That's the 12 PDR Napoleon cannon. And then they also have general sea life and animals from around the Fort Macon area and the island. And some fun pirate ships and different things like that. I know the kids would love these, as well as many adults. Here's the mini pirate ship for $17. A lot less expensive than the original Lego sets, for sure. These are also really neat. A collection of die-cast pencil sharpeners, Civil War era. This is the mortar for $8. Here's a little cannon for $9. And they have an entire Fort Macon pencil sharpener. Neat little die-cast replica for $8. Here's another type of cannon. I'm sorry, I don't know the type. For $8. Whole variety of those. So neat. It's not just something to sit around, but it's useful. I always like that. Here's a little information on Civil War cannons and all the different shapes and sizes. If you want to pause that and take a look, you can learn more about it. And here are some other die-cast cannons that they have there. Naval and American cannons. They also have a collection of tumblers, mugs, postcards, and other collectible booklets and books and items related to Fort Macon. I'm going to leave you with a look around the outside of Fort Macon. As I mentioned, they have lots of walking trails and natural areas as well as a beach that you can visit, all for absolutely $0. That the museum does take donations. They're not required. Don't know if you can see, there's a little lizard scurrying about down there in the brush that we were trying to get on film. I don't think we captured him clearly enough for you to see. But across the beach there, you can see, you're looking at Atlantic Beach. You can even see a little bit of Shackleford Island in the last video I took you there, where they have wild horses and amazing shelling. You just take a ferry across there and you can stay as long as you want or as short as you want for the day. And I mentioned before, there are designated swimming areas. You should not swim anywhere on the island that's not designated. There are no lifeguards, but there are some dangerous rip currents underneath there, so you only want to swim where they tell you it's safe to swim. A beautiful free vacation day at Fort Macon in North Carolina. I definitely would put that on your travel to-do list. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share these videos. That's how you say thank you. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Until then, take care and God bless.